Today I'm going to be talking about the serpentine belt kits and how they compare to the stock. This is what it's going to be. Consists of a pulley down here at the crank end. It's going to consist of an alternator or generator pulley up at this end. One piece here, one piece there. It also comes with an idler that sits here. It contains a little bracket and a couple of arms and some adjusting screws. And in this particular case, this happens to be a BMD that you can see right there. BMD, I believe, is out of business, which is one of the reasons why I started with them. So I think they were one of the first to start it, but they got, for whatever reason, driven out. So let's take a look at some of the other kits that you can get. This is the MST kit. Slightly different mounting piece right here. I don't know if they make them like this anymore. Scat makes them, and they look kind of like that. I think I can slide this around. MP makes one. How about that? CB Performance makes one. All right, let's take a look at what the manufacturers of these systems are trying to tell you. Let me state right now, I personally find these things to be rather ugly. One of the things you have to understand about the mind of Scott. Scott finds beauty in beautiful functionality. And I don't find these things to be functionally worthy of being thought of as beautiful. But you do what you want to do, and I do what I want to do. As far as that goes, that shouldn't play into it, and I'm going to try and avoid that in what I'm about ready to tell you as far as the belt itself goes. But let's see what MST is trying to tell us. Famous for reliability, consistency, overall quality. That's their personal system. I have no idea. I don't really care. All while making your engine look amazing. Again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. The system delivers a slight horsepower improvement. I believe I know where that comes from, and I doubt it. Again, you have to compare an apple to an apple. And if that system delivers a slight horsepower improvement, it probably means that it was spinning the fan slower than the other system. I'll get into it technically why I believe that to be the case in a little bit. Reducing belt slip. But if you don't drive the fan fast enough, the belt's not going to slip. Therefore, that's not part of the process. Delivering more cooling to your engine. I've got to talk about the more cooling because that's what everybody seems to want to do. Anyway, let's move on to what some of the other people are saying. What does CB say? Broken alternator generator pulleys. No, if you've broken your alternator generator pulley, I'm pretty sure you've done something wrong. That's not on the alternator generator pulley, that's on the mechanic that's doing the stuff. Thrown belts, I talked about this last time. You put a quality modern cogged belt in there, and you're not going to throw them, generally speaking. You're not going to turn them. So I don't see this happening. This isn't happening. Keep in mind that my channel is not about high RPM stuff. It's like stock and extended stock. What can you get done with a stock valve spring? Probably about 5,000 RPM. That's it. Flat multi-groove belt and idler pulley help reduce drag and lost power while increasing cooling efficiency and reliability. I don't want to talk about reliability. You can find anecdotes both ways. Both of them can blow up. Both of them can work perfectly well. Let's focus on the other pieces, which are reduced drag, lost power, increasing cooling efficiency. Let's see if anybody else has something to say. Okay, this is what MP's got on their page. Quiet and smooth performance, increased belt life. Basically, they're not saying a whole lot there. Congratulations, MP, for not overhyping it. Okay, I think I'm going to focus on the following. Reduced drag and lost power, increasing cooling efficiency. There really are only two things that you can get out of a belt. It's a belt. I'm going to start right now with the reduced drag and lost power. So in order to go and take a look at this, we've got to go back to one of those little tiny blurbs. This one, U.S. Department of Energy. Do you remember from last time where they said that the belts have like 97, 98, 95% efficiency, whatever? Right, let's not compare it to a V-belt. We know that the V-belts are not right, that you should be using a cogged belt. So what you need to do is compare a cogged belt to one of these serpentine belts. Let's come down here. Here we go. Synchronous belts. Again, it's not a synchronous belt, but it's built with a synchronous belt style profile. 98%. On-cooler lasts longer, 2% more efficient than standard V belts. There's our 95. So we'll get the 95%. We add to its 97. We compare the 97 to the 98. Now, if you remember from last time, I told you it's not the 97 to 98, which doesn't make much of a difference. It's what you lose. You lose 2% or you lose 3%. If you lose 2%, that's pretty good compared to 3%. That means the 3% is like 50% worse, or you could say that the 2% is 1/3 better. So let's talk about it as though it's 1/3 better. But that's only part of what you need to look at. So I'm going to go and draw a little tiny bit on the whiteboard. So what I was saying upstairs was that we're interested in the efficiency of the belt, and somebody's going to tell you it's all about the friction. No. Friction and energy. If something slides past something, energy is lost. Here, think about it like this. I put my hands together and I push them together. There's a force pushing my hands together right now. I'm going to take this hand and I'm going to pull it down this direction. Okay? I'm pulling against my other hand. Do you see it moving? No, but I'm telling you, there is a certain force in that hand. See, there's no energy, however, being lost at that point because I haven't exceeded the point at which I'm pulling past the friction that exists between them. Once I start pulling harder and harder and harder, and all of a sudden it starts slipping. Now I have a force. I've got a force. So a force by the resistance is work, and the rate that it takes me to do that means that there's a power being transmitted. So if I put it together and any of those things are missing, then there is no power being dissipated due to friction. Okay? Force is there, but there's no distance. Okay? I can take the entire assembly and I can go and run it around just like you would as if it was going around one of these pulleys, right? But okay, I've got that. I've got a force, and both pieces are going around the distance. So there's no relative change in this. Since there's no relative change, I have a time, but I do not have a distance. I've got a force, I've got time, but no distance. Therefore, no power. You have to get all three of them. I've got to have this over a period of time, which happens when it slips. Both systems can slip, so they both can lose power when they slip. But when they're functioning properly and not slipping, the friction doesn't matter. Generally speaking, for us, it's not going to matter. Remember, my channel's not about that high RPM stuff where it's down here where you're probably not going to be slipping very much. So anyway, stock and serpentine. And remember what I said. This belt on the stock side is, what would we say, it was 97 versus 98, or this one is 3. Okay, and every bend on this one is a 2. So if I come around here on the stock side, I bend, and then I stay bent, and then I unbend. So this is a 3. And I bend, and I unbend, and that's a 3. I bend, like let's say bend, and then I unbend, there's a 2, and I bend and I unbend, there's another 2. However, I have drawn the serpentine system incorrectly. So this does not exist on the serpentine side. What the serpentine side has is the idler, which sits in there. If I could draw it right, way too much caffeine today. So you draw it down like this, and then it bends and it comes down like that. So there's an additional bend right there. And every time the thing bends, you lose energy. So I've got, there's still 2 bends, one here, but I've introduced an additional bend. There's now an additional bend. Now, in addition to this bend, it's not just that it bent, it's how much you bent it. Okay, I've got a real mild bend in here, but I've got a mild bend. This is a little bit more bend, but I've got the same little bit more bend. But this bend is smaller than the other bends. So it's not just that it bends and it's a 2, because it bends the belt a little bit further, it's like a 2 plus. Now, there's something else that's missing on this particular thing that we didn't talk about either, and that's the bearing that sits right in there. This bearing does not exist over here, just like this bend in the belt doesn't exist over there. So that bearing is going to also suck up some power. So this is now 2 plus plus. So if you add this thing up, this one's a 6, this one's like a 6 plus plus. Which one wins? Clearly, this one is going to beat that one. But you know what? They're so close that it doesn't really matter. But the important part is that you have to compare this to one of the notched belts. So this is going to have to be one of those belts that's got the little cogs in it, right? So we got the little cogs in this one. Do it the right way, and this is what you end up with. Basically, they don't matter, because whatever you're gaining in the belt up in here, you lose at that bend plus the bearing. Let's move on. We just finished looking at, let's see, which part? Help reduce drag and lost power. Well, basically, we looked at the drag. Helps reduce drag. No, it doesn't help reduce drag. It's basically the same drag. But we need to move on to the other piece. Increased cooling efficiency. We'll take a look at that. And let's see what kind of claims are being made over here by MST. Delivers more cooling to your engine. But let's go back to what CB is saying over here. You cannot trust CB Performance to tell you the truth. They're just going to try and sell you some crap, and you know that they don't understand what they're talking about and don't give a crap about what's happening based on the following little bit of stuff that I found. This is from somebody else's video. They're installing a CB rocker, swivel foot setup, whatever. But it comes with the following directions, which we know to be incorrect. You don't ever put it off to the side. You always put it down the middle, as close to the middle as you can get it. But what's interesting, it's hard to read. You're not going to be able to read it. But down in here, it says exactly the old off to the side, rotate the valve. It's all right down in there. So they don't care about the truth. They just don't want to argue with you, and they want to sell you some stuff. So you cannot trust CB Performance, which goes back to one of my primary theses. You cannot trust the great ones to be honest. They try and convince you to do stuff because look how grand and glorious I am. Buy into my stuff. They want to sell you product. They're a business. I don't blame them for that. So let's move on. We need to go to Desmos. So we pop up our calculator, and here's our Desmos. This is what we're going to do for the next piece. I have a single line right here in black. These are RPMs. I have it running through 6,000 RPMs. Generally, I cut my channel off at 5,000 RPMs, but I'm going to allow this to go to 6 because a lot of the data that's necessary for the fan comes from people who are calculating it, not calculating it, but experimenting at about 6,000 RPMs. So what exactly is that black line? Well, that black line happens to be this formula right here. I've got X, which represents RPM. It's my X-axis. But I've got this T value right there. Well, what is T? T represents a torque. Okay, what torque is it? Well, we'll get into the torque in just a second. But I take that torque, and I'm going to multiply that torque by the RPMs, and then this ratio R1. Well, what's my ratio R1? R1 happens to be this particular slider right there. Notice that I can drive the line up and down. You remember last time in my prior video I said that my ratio for my stock pulley and my alternator pulley is about 1.6 to 1. And I did it experimentally, so I know it's pretty darned accurate. I figured you can run maybe up to 2 to 1. So this gives you a range over which you can then experiment with this torque line right here. This torque line is going to represent the torque that is available to you to drive the alternator generator pulley, the top pulley. Easy to figure this out, but based on this and some simple formulas, you can figure out how much power can be transmitted through the pulley. I'd like to be able to transmit as much power as possible if I want to spin my fan that fast, or I'd like to transmit as little power as possible if I don't want to spin my fan that fast. And this is determined by tightening or loosening the belt. Let's just leave it at about 5. Let's take a look at the formula. So this is, of course, the torque RPM formula. It's the same thing that you would use to develop the horsepower rating of your motor at the flywheel. But in this particular case, we're trying to figure out how much power is available at the top pulley. This is the derivation of the constant that I use inside that formula. This 5252 right here, this comes from the power is the torque times the circumference as you rotate around, the number of RPMs, which comes from your crankshaft, foot-pounds, which is the torque which is available at that top pulley per minute. Anyway, it comes all down to this particular constant right there. If you come back to my formula, I've got the 5250 right tucked in right there. This represents how much power can be transmitted at the pulley. We now need to stick into this thing the fan. So this is fan power. And based on some information over there at the SAMA, people say anywhere it's 15 to 16 horsepower. I did a little bit of experimentation, or not experimentation, but calculation. And I was able to confirm that from a calculational standpoint, that's pretty accurate. But it may be a bit on the low side based on what I've seen over here at this particular forum, the Volt Zone. So anyway, I've seen up to 22 brake horsepower loss with a serpentine belt setup. Unfortunately, the guy doesn't say at how many RPMs. Probably around 6,000. So I've got a slider that allows me to vary the power curve at the fan. 15 horsepower, 16 horsepower, zip, all the way up to 22 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. So the fan probably sucks up power anywhere from that to this. But notice that it doesn't make a huge difference down in here where I like to drive, which is highway speeds. Let's take it back to 16 horsepower. We're just going to work with that today. 16 horsepower. Okay, we're missing another piece. That piece is the alternator or generator, depending on what you want to talk about. A lot of people think it takes up an awful lot of power. Those formulas are well known. The efficiency of the system, though, is a little bit kind of up in the air. You can turn the alternator off, but all of the bearings in the alternator are still there driving the fan. So if you isolate the mechanical failures of the alternator, inefficiencies, not failures, but the mechanical inefficiencies at the alternator and just throw it over there to the fan, then all you're working with is the electrical inefficiencies of the alternator, which is probably around 70%. That's where I got that number right there. This is a conversion factor between watts and horsepower, and then of course the actual watts is simply the amperage, A2 by 12 volts. Yeah, okay, maybe it puts out at 14. It doesn't really matter that much. But I can vary my amps anywhere from that up to 90. So if you've got a 90 amp alternator running at peak, well, there you go. You know, you can take that and you can add that to whatever horsepower there is required to drive the fan. But generally speaking, you're concerned about your fan during the times when it's the middle of the day, it's wicked hot. You know, you're not going to be running your rear window defroster or your dash fan. Maybe your radio's not cranked up huge. And the power draw at your ignition system is probably somewhere around 2 amps. So let's just put it at 5 amps and say, okay, well, at 5 amps, that's about what the alternator generator is pulling as you're driving down the road. I take that and this one, and they can be added together to form that curve right there. This is kind of the combined curve. So like I said, if I run my amps up, I can shift the entire curve up and down. Let's put it back to 5 amps. Or I can increase the horsepower. So let's put it back to 16. So this is what happens. I've got a torque available at my generator alternator pulley of 5 foot-pounds. And at 5 foot-pounds, I get a crossing at about 4,500 RPMs, which means I've got enough power to drive the fan to 4,500. And keep in mind, this is not just the fan, it's a fan alternator combination to 4,500 RPMs at just 5 foot-pounds of torque. I can easily push this up. Oops, sorry, it's the wrong one. Let me push up the torque a little tiny bit. You know, if I want to run my fan all the way to, let's say, 5,000 RPMs, then I need to have about 6.5 foot-pounds of torque. And at 9 foot-pounds, you've got enough to cover all the way to 6,000. So it doesn't take a whole lot of torque to power the fan because it's spinning at so many RPM. If I increase this ratio, remember my summer belt spins this thing at about 1.7, and I can get to 4,500. That's about the same spot, 5 foot-pounds for me. What happens up in this area? You say this actually gets out and beyond the point at which I like to talk about. But I do investigate this stuff right here, and there is the power. You know, the original motor had a red line of about 4,500 RPM. Let's take a look at that curve, torque and horsepower curve. There it is, another forum. I'm over here at the flying forum this time. So somebody found a horsepower and torque curve, real nice, and posted it. This is from a factory Volkswagen manual. You can see that the old 1600 right there 50 horsepower with torque down in here. Peak torque at about, looks like 2,900 or so, and peak horsepower about 4,000. So that's kind of interesting. But you can see that bang, they cut it off, what is that, 4,600 RPM, something like that. So yeah, red line's around 4,500. I take my channel to 5,000. That's it. So if you want your fan to run all the way to 5,000, what have you got? Well, let's assume that we're going to try and set up the torque there at the alternator generator. So we've got a rainy day, got my headlights, taillights are on, my windshield wipers are running, about 30 amps or so, you know, the total output of a generator. And I'd like to be able to cover that through 4,500 RPMs, which is around there. That's going to be about 5 foot-pounds of torque. And if you wanted to do the same thing through 5,000 RPMs, that's going to be about 6 to 6.5 foot-pounds of torque. So 5 to 6 foot-pounds of torque looks like that's a pretty good setup for my channel and people who are trying to operate within that range. The business end of the Beetle. All right, so what we're looking at is how much torque does it take me to turn this right here. So you get out your torque wrench, you throw your torque wrench on there. Based on the numbers upstairs, it's not this. How much? I mean, if you look at this, you'd be like, wow, that's like a really loose belt. The old twist test, whatever. I don't care. What matters is the amount of torque that passes through it. I think it's listing right at about 0, and I start to turn it, and it hits right about 5. So I've got about 5 foot-pounds of torque passing through there. And 5 foot-pounds of torque is what it takes to provide the power to the fan and the alternator. Anything past that is just force that goes into the bearings that destroys stuff in here. This is my original alternator, 1973. I may have some different stuff in here, but I'm not even sure about that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this has been replaced. I think it got a little bit brittle and I replaced it. But other than that, that's all original. This is the original pulley. Yeah, I don't really want to tear that up. So I've also got the original bearings in there as well. And they do rattle and make a bit of noise. So I don't want to tear them up. So I definitely don't want to run more force through here than I need. And that force depends on the torque. Not this. I do like to run loose belt. Understand how this stuff works. And work with what you've got. Anyway, I just took it down to Tallgrass a few days ago. 200 miles, just jamming. Oh, it was a good ride. Alright, let's get to the final little piece in here. Reducing belt slip and delivering more cooling. Well, we've just shown that for people that are running through 5,000 RPMs, if you get enough torque out there at the alternator generator, your belt will not slip. So since your belt is not slipping, you cannot possibly be delivering more cooling to your engine with these belt systems. So MSD is effectively lying to you. And we come over here and CB Performance has got the exact same thing. Increasing cooling efficiency. No, it does not. As long as that belt does not slip, and it's, as I've shown you, it's easy enough to make sure that it doesn't slip, you're good to go. It's just one of the most crazy things I've ever said. These guys are just BSing like you wouldn't believe. Alright, well I got to close this video out at some point in time, so we're pretty much done with it except for one final little piece. And that is a piece that I got into last week, which is the adjustability of this particular type of system. All I need to do is put on a different belt, and I can make it go faster or slower depending on the time of the year. Now, if you've got your old serpentine system, how are you going to change the ratios? I did manage to find one place in Europe that makes different size top pulleys. A whole bunch of people at the Samba refer to them as a solution in search of a problem. See, this actually is not a problem. It's not inefficient, and it does what it's supposed to do, and it does it properly for very little money. I also happen to like a heavy pulley, and you can't get the serpentine system with this kind of pulley. So, not for Scotty C. You do what you want. If you like them, knock yourself out. But just understand that they are not providing you with a mechanical engineering benefit of any sort. Oh, the belts last longer. Come on. I don't know. Who knows? This is the belt that I built the engine with like 6.5 years ago. Still works perfectly. Not going to change it. So I don't know about that longevity of the belt stuff. Anyway, well, let's end it here.